biology first. I know it's better at the beginning.
Welcome all to the launch of La Mesa Early Childhood Education Podcast, hosted by D. Howard International Education Foundation, done with our collaborators, actually, who we couldn't do it without them. Great team from Pre-K for SA, also with the collaboration of Early Matters SA. And we're very fortunate to have as our permanent moderator a subject matter expert in this field, John Green Ortero, who is the Chief Innovation Officer for Pre-K for SA.
Thank you, Wayne, and welcome everyone. Pull up a chair and join us at La Mesa, where educators gather to discuss topics around STEM education and early childhood. I'm John Green Otero, and I'm here with two amazing educators, Sarah Heinrich, and our special guest today, Leslie Harkins. Leslie's a teacher here at Pre-K for SA. She's a graduate of the University of Incarnate Word with over 20 years of experience in education. Thank you for being here again.
Glad to be here.
And thank you all to everyone virtually who's joined us, whether you're viewing us after the fact, right, in the comfort of your own home, or you're here on Zoom today. We're excited to have you here. And this begins a journey for us, right? We're excited to start this journey as we explore the benefits of STEM education in early childhood and some of the topics, why we care about it, why it's interesting, why it's critical for our children to engage in this early. As part of the process for today, I know that Wayne did such a great job welcoming you all and talking a little bit about the logistics, but we encourage you to join this conversation via chat. Sarah will be moderating that chat and making sure that your voices are elevated to the conversation. We want to hear you, we want to talk to you. There's a function located at the bottom of your screen by selecting the raise hand icon from the reactions icon. It's also available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So, like I said, today we're going to get into the conversation around STEM. Early childhood. So before we do, let's talk about this. What does scientific inquiry look like in early childhood?
It's a very interesting question. This is my second year with Pre-K for SA, and previously I'd been teaching 3-year-olds before I came here, and of course last year I was teaching Pre-K 3 and 4 mixed age, and then this year I became a part of the pilot program to work with infants and toddlers. So that's something that I've really been thinking about a lot, because 3s and 4s, I was used to that. I knew what I was doing. So now I'm kind of having to reframe how we think about scientific thought and inquiry, because as I experienced earlier today, even something simple like knowing whether something's alive or not alive, they don't have enough experiences in their life to be able to understand the differences. So we really have to kind of figure out how to break it down on a level to like build that foundation that they're going to need later for that critical thought.
You know, it's so interesting. So many things that you're bringing up. You know, as a parent myself and as an educator, you get into this place, especially when you're in early childhood, and you've got this great opportunity, just as you said, to get to work with some of our youngest learners, right? What's the earliest that
Currently in my classroom, I'm over the toddler pod. I'm actually over 2 classrooms. So I have a younger toddler classroom and an older toddler classroom. And so currently, I believe my youngest in my younger room is about 18 months, and the oldest in that room is maybe about 2.5.
Fantastic.
And then in the older room, it's basically about 2.5 to like about 3.5. So it's interesting to have that whole spread. And then I take time in each classroom on different days. So it's interesting even just making that shift from the younger end to the older end and seeing how they learned, how they're taking in the information differently, how they're processing it differently.
Right. And so to that point, there's sort of this foundational philosophy that I think a lot of us, whether you're in education or not, you sort of see children as the blank slate, right? The tabula rasa, right? And you go, okay, well, how do we even begin to get children to think about STEM, this complicated subject matter, science inquiry, right? Theory, cause and effect, all these things with 18-month-olds. So how do you approach it?
I think of it as like being just the very basis of like scientific thought and inquiry is just curiosity. They are learning about the world. They're naturally little scientists. You might not think of it in terms of like something like you might imagine a scientist is doing these amazing complicated things,
Right.
thinking about like conclusions, hypothesis, and all that kind of stuff. But really, we're working at that base level. What makes this happen? So they experiment in the way that they have available to them. You know, if I stack my blocks, how high can I go before it falls over? So they kind of work from a basic level and have a question that they kind of just keep going with it.
I love that. Can I highlight something that you said that I really, really love, because I think it's important for educators for us to think about this framing. You know, you just framed this as, you know, this curiosity, this experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about the classroom experience as experimentation, right? Like, so educators, right, Sarah, I'm curious your perspective on this as well. You have educators that come into the field and they've got their previous experiences, right? And if you frame this as every child is experimenting, every opportunity is an experiment, how does that shift how I approach that child? Right, to use our language, the adult-child interaction.
Yes.
Like how I mirror, echo, point out, as that conversation mold with that new framing of experimentation.
I feel like when you're working from a place of following a child's curiosity, oftentimes you will get groups of children who are exploring the same sort of schema of how the world works. I have this group of 5 or 6 little boys who are really into trajectory. And so from a more traditional standpoint, you might go into that space being like, oh, you have to stop throwing everything. Right. But if you approach it from the viewpoint of children are making sense of their world, they're understanding, building this data set, and are my interactions reliable, and what are the variables that change that? And you look at it from that perspective, you have this really great opportunity to sort of go into the way that they're thinking and to give them tools and language to shape that. And I think that one of the things that, if you're not careful, it's really easy to miss in attempting to manage or focus learning, that you're missing opportunities to tap into curiosity, to creativity, and to build from where they are with the things that they are interested in. And you can give them, oh, well, we noticed 5 times it did that, 2 times it did this. And so our data shows, and just give them the information and the tools, talking about what they do, so that they naturally progress from exploratory science to more structured scientific ideas.
This really resonates with me because I think about, you know, a lot of the work that we do is around helping other educators sort of adopt these mindsets, right? And so it really grounds this idea that you're putting forth, that Sarah's echoing, is that if you, the educator, right, sort of if you shift your mindset, then it helps to reinforce the kind of behaviors, curiosity, methodologies that we want to see in children.
Yeah, you kind of support where they're at, and you kind of almost in a way take yourself out of it for a minute, your adult perspective, like you were talking earlier about like, oh, don't throw things. Take that adult perspective out and think about like, how can I support this learning? What can I do? How can I give them the vocabulary? How can I give them the things that they need to continue this and to build on for later on? So like right now, observation at this level might be, what do you notice? If a child is able to express that more, and going further backwards into the younger age, that might be you as the adult saying, oh, I noticed when you threw that flew really far. Maybe if you throw it softer, I wonder what's going to happen. You know, verbalizing that for them when they're not able to. So that's kind of already helping them to build that foundation later. So when they acquire more language, they're able to have that to pull from.
I love the tip.
A really great question from Wayne just a moment ago. And he was wanting to know your perspective, I suppose all of our perspectives. Do you feel like teachers need formalized training, that they need some additional training to be able to introduce STEM in an early childhood?
I definitely have my thought, but of course, Leslie,
I was going to say, I think it's definitely helpful. As I mentioned, part of the pilot program doing infant toddler program here, and we went through high scope training,
Yes.
which helped us with understanding some of the growth that's going on at this age, and like a way of framing things so that we can better support the kids,
Great.
the children. So I think you can come in with a natural proclivity to help with the science. You can have like a natural way of learning and doing things that you're able to instinctively help them. But I think also having
Yes.
that training helps you really hone it in. I had mentioned before we started that this year we have professional learning communities, and I had the opportunity to join the Science PLC for short. And I am grouped in with other pre-K for SA teachers, and everyone else in that grouping is pre-K 3-4 mixed. And so it's interesting to kind of sit there and think about the topics that we're talking about and figure out how I can adjust it for my age grouping and how we can further adjust it for the infant age grouping, because I think people kind of think of like, oh, 3s and 4s, 2s and 3s, 1s and 2s. They maybe think of it as being not so different, but there's really a
Yes.
lot of things happening in those early years that even between 2 and 4, it's really almost a different universe.
And we're going to come back to that. I do want to touch on that because that's a big deal. Is it sort of these developmental milestones and what the best way to support children and families who are interested in supporting their children on this trajectory. So we'll come back. We'll come back to that. But I wanted to add to this. I wanted to add my 2 cents. I completely agree with Leslie. I think that's absolutely right. I think there are people who are naturally inclined to be really curious, and anytime you as a parent or as an educator or as a loving, figure in a child's life can share that curiosity, share that natural inclination to be in awe and wonder of the world, that's a gift to children, right? Because to your point, they are naturally curious. It's not like something you got to turn on for them. Often it's the opposite.
Yeah.
It's how we unintentionally,
Why?
right?
Yeah.
We unintentionally turn them off. And so I do think you're absolutely right. It's not so much that you need to go to this specialized training, but specialized training does help, right? We have the benefit of living and breathing this work. And so, in terms of that like adage of getting your 10,000 hours, we get those 10,000 hours pretty easily. But someone who might not have the benefit of that, I do think it's really important to learn those tips and tricks, to be able to get into that mindset we were talking so beautifully articulated earlier, because if you can reframe that thinking, all the stuff you talked about, removing that bias, right? Not just arbitrarily putting meaning behind the throw, but taking every opportunity to go, oh, you're testing gravity right now. How cool.
I literally threw out the word gravity today because they were knocking stuff over, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's how gravity works. Something falls. That's how gravity works. And I know it's unlikely that they're gonna go home and talk about gravity right now, and they're like 2 years old and just barely starting to kind of grasp the vocabulary that they need for everyday life, but I'm already putting it out there.
But that's it. They're being exposed to the
Yes.
language, they're being exposed to the concepts, and we want that robust experience, right? And so I have a child that's almost 3 years old, and I'm always surprised, even though I've been in this work a long time, how quickly he's sort of using that language, even if he's not using with the specificity that someone who's 30 might use it, right?
Yeah.
But they're playing with it, right? And so my favorite way of sort of thinking about this is, everybody learns through their senses, right? They're learning through touch, sight, smell, taste, and it's so much more visceral with children, especially the young ones, because they're like literally picking things up and putting them in their mouth, right? And I'm going to keep coming back to this because I think it's the absolute right place to start if you are on your journey for how do you support the children in your life in the STEM journey, is to reconnect with that curiosity and that mindset, because the last thing we want to do is inhibit it, right? And we can do that super easily just by being the adults we are and going, oh, no, put that in.
Well, and I think it's important too to really take the time to be able to activate that child somewhere in you.
Yes.
to be able to marvel at the little things, because right now, those little things are huge for them. And if you shut that down, then you're shutting down that curiosity. I think of earlier when we had some of the flowers in bloom before we had the frost, or the ice. I was out there with the kids and we were looking at the flowers and that they were noticing the bees, and I was letting them know, like, oh, the bees, they're doing this job, and oh, if you notice, you might be able to see their proboscis, I always say it wrong, like just kind of drawing their attention to that so that they can really look at those little details. And then again, later on, it might spark an interest.
And I bet even after,
and we can make those
after the
connections
freeze,
too.
you were able to come back and go, what happened?
Exactly, yeah, because they noticed it was
Oh,
like
absolutely.
what
We're in our
happened.
upper scale.
Yeah, like they went from lovely purple to sort of
Gray.
a sad gray,
Mushy.
mushy looking thing. So, it's like also that's again observing change in the environment, which
That's right.
when you have scientific processes, you have to observe the change, you have to document that. So again, that's like laying that foundation right there.
And sorry, Sarah, please.
No, I wanted to bring us really
Yes.
quickly back to milestones, back to resources,
Yes.
back to teacher training, because David had a comment and he wanted to know, does Texas have pre-K standards for science learning? And Texas
It does.
definitely has guidelines for that, but those guidelines are not specific to just pre-K. They have licensing guidelines and resources that go all the way through your infant and toddler learning, and that is the case in many, many states, is that there will be resources out there, guidelines that are set by your state to help guide what should children be doing. And I can't understate how useful resources from NACI,
Yes.
resources from High Scope,
Yes.
resources from where we are right here, Pre-K for SA and the D. Howard International Education Foundation are putting together banks of resources for teachers. So the information is out there if you're motivated to learn and to go and get those resources.
That's right.
They are a Google step away.
Great, so going back to those milestones. So what would you say, what does it look like? Give us just a few steps. What would it look like in an 18-month-old? What was that other age you said? 24?
Like 24-month,
24-month-old,
3-year-olds.
3-year-old. So what does it generally look like from a STEM perspective in each of those age ranges?
I would say, like the 18-month-old perspective, So let's pick something. So for example, we had talked about throwing an object.
Yes.
An 18-month-old, they're not. Let me rewind. Let me do building something. So an 18-month-old, they're probably not going to get very far.
Mm-hmm.
And when it falls, they may not necessarily realize why it fallen.
Mm-hmm.
But you can be there to kind of go, oh, I noticed it fell. Oh, I wonder if we move it this way, that way. You can kind of support that. So I think for them, it requires a lot of outside help to kind of figure some of these things out.
They're agents of change, but they don't always see the correlation between, right? Like that tracks with me.
And then as they get a little bit older, like say we're 2, they kind of start to figure out maybe they might need to shift a block another way to kind of help it stay balanced.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then the 3-year-olds kind of tend to be a little more cognizant of that, especially if they've had the experience since they were 18-month-olds to kind of figure out how to build things, and they may branch out and experiment more with different shapes and like how tall they can get it.
That's been my experience as well. To use your analogy, I've seen them sort of at the 18-month-old range. They're able to do these things, but sometimes it's a struggle to understand why it didn't work out the way that it did. And then you've got the next evolution of it where they can recreate the thing, but they still might struggle with understanding why isn't it sturdy?
Yeah.
Right? And then finally it's, I need to be meticulous on how I stack the blocks, right? Because they've now understood the cause of the lead in this instance. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What advice would you give to a teacher who is, or a parent who is interested in doing this activity? Is there a particular activity that you lean towards?
I you know, I think I would just let your child lead
Mhm.
as far as where you want to go with that foundation in STEM. If your child is absolutely fascinated with building, then lean into that with maybe, you might start doing different kinds of blocks, like the magnet tiles
Right,
versus
right.
the regular like foam blocks or even wood blocks. Or if they lean towards, like you see that they love cars and they like to
My
make
son
them
definitely loves cars.
roll, then you can kind of use that to build their curiosity, like, oh, how can we make it go faster? How can we make this ramp go, you know, oh, well, we make the ramp go at a steeper angle, let's see what happens. So I think let the child lead you and support them with what their interest is.
Mhm.
And then if you're not sure where to go, again, you can always go to like NACI and that kind of
Right.
thing, see if there's something else that can help you as a parent, or early learning, I think it's early learning matters we were talking about too, that's another good
Yeah.
support.
Yeah, there's a plethora of great resources these days. I was going through my collection in anticipation of this conversation of books for my son, and there's, you know, first books on neuroscience and first books on physics and nuclear fusion, even like just there is a wealth of really fun, age appropriate, developmentally appropriate texts out there.
And they make a ton of children's and baby books that
Yes.
are like ABCs of, you know,
Women in
astrophysics
STEM, yeah,
and women in
astrophysics.
STEM. There are a ton of really good supplementary resources, but I think it just cannot be overstated how important it is to not try to over formalize at these earliest stages, but to just really follow the curiosity and to provide them lots and lots of opportunities and different materials, like you were talking about all those different kinds of blocks, because the bigger their data set is, and the more often they're hearing the formal language that you apply in context, the more neural pathways they're going to be forming about that. And when they get to the stage where pruning is starting to happen, those are going to be things that stay because they've been strengthened through repetition and practice so much.
Yeah,
And I
that's
think
right.
I think it's also important to realize it doesn't require fancy equipment. You know, you can literally go outside, sit on the ground, and you can find rocks to stack. I mean, you can
I
find
appreciate you
things
bringing
in
that
the
up.
natural
I appreciate bringing
environment.
it up because I think a lot of
to
families are gonna
explore
say, oh, I've gotta get all these resources, and it's gonna cost a lot of money, and I'm glad that you bring up that
Because
it's.
it's all around us. Science doesn't just exist in a package that you can buy on Amazon.
Right,
It's all
right,
around us.
right.
So while you may not be able to afford to get like the fanciest magnet tiles, maybe you can find something simpler just in your own backyard
Oh, I mean,
and go from there.
it's an interesting thing, right, that we all seen, and I'm sure many of our people who are joining us have felt this as well, that, you know, we grew up in a generation that got to really be outside a lot, and we're seeing less and less of that for a variety of good and, you know, not as desirable reasons. But yeah, the natural world offers us, it's one of the reasons why PK4SA has such intentionality with the products we use. You know, we use a lot of materials that are natural. We have partnerships with arborists who come and bring, you know, found objects all the time. We have a loose parts curriculum. We have all those things. And I think what's nice about that, to your point, Leslie, is it's replicable, right? Anyone can take this. Anyone can do this. I think we overcomplicate things, don't we, as adults? We think they have to be, you know, if I'm teaching coding, I've got to get a computer out and I've got to like sit there and talk about, you know, what operating system it is, rather than just letting children explore.
Wayne was curious about whether or not we take our pre-K4SA students on field trips.
Pre-K, yes, the pre-K 3, the 3s and 4s, they do go on field trips. I know, and also one of the things they do at our program is also introduce them to swimming. I know a lot of the pre-K classes have been going swimming, so while not formally in a field trip, I would say that's kind of
It's
a field
definitely
trip.
an excursion.
Yes, a big excursion.
Right.
But yes, they do have the opportunity to go on field trips. Our infants and toddlers, for now, and I think probably I can't speak to it because that's above what I do. But I can see where even if we really wanted to, it would be quite challenging to make it happen. We do have something at Pre-K4SA called City Explorations, and that's something that right now in pre-K, they arrange opportunities for families to meet up. It can be in the evenings, it can be on the weekends, and that's sort of like field trip that's not a field trip in the traditional sense, but it gives families that opportunity maybe to go someplace where they might not have. Currently, right now, we are not doing that in the infant toddler program, but I could see potentially in the future where that could be something that we could put into place, because then that way it takes out the complication of figuring out how to transport a bunch of infants and toddlers into supervision.
No, the city exploration program is just fantastic.
And there's always an equation to the value of any given field trip, and that is the time removed from the child setting to travel from point A to point B and all of the logistics, is it worth the experience that they're going to have? And I know for a lot of our children, what we try to do instead is to bring those experiences in to maximize their learning throughout the day and their opportunities to explore and engage in their curiosity throughout the day. And so as much as possible, we bring experiences in.
Gracias is a great example of that.
Yes.
So in the education sector, we call those residencies or often special programs. Sarah leads up our Gracias program. While not specifically a STEM program, there are a lot of STEM components.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned Gracias, because last year I was teaching pre-K, and we generally base our Gracias projects on either a city exploration or a field trip. And last year, being with pre-K, we based it on a field trip. We went to the Riverwalk, we saw like Alebrijes, and we did some kind of printmaking, and we put it all together to make a little Alebrije representing what we saw. This year, infants and toddlers are taking part of it. However, we don't have the field trip or the city exploration. I can't speak to what the infant pod is doing, but from my end, I chose to think of it as an exploration of the artist. So we're doing a lot of art in the early childhood years. Should be just the exploration of the materials. It's process over product.
Yes.
So one of the things that I'm having my students do is we're just exploring art. We're working with the different materials, and then in the end, our Gracias project will be all those things that we've done kind of put together into a final project.
And just for context for anyone who's not intimately familiar with the Gracias San, no, that's right. But the Gracias San Antonio project that the Pre-K for SA does, it's a year-long civic engagement process that does focus on process over product with art. So children do art exploration, they create a piece at the end of the year. But I think it says something about the mindset that we have as educators, because we take a similar approach to our STEM learning. Is we know that children at this age, being natural scientists, it is less about the formalized experiments that we set up and do with them in class and the robots that they can make or the roller coasters that they build. It is much more about the process of learning how to explore and learning how to set up a project. If I want to find this out, I am reminded of several years past where we were exploring how things fly. And so we did, as a matter of fact, it was pre-COVID, I want to say 2019, 2020, and we had been working with Wayne on a different project and looking at an aviation curriculum and experimenting with the children on their interest in how things move through air.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think the kids wouldn't necessarily know that they were doing a physics experiment, but on the playground we have different hills that are different sizes, different levels of steepness. And the toddlers in my classrooms have been rolling on the lower hills. They've been doing that quite a bit. Some of them can actually roll, some of them just kind of sort of slide. But still, they've all kind of experienced that on the smaller one. Well, the other day, I had about 2 or 3 that decided to try it on one of the steeper hills. And they noticed a distinct difference. They had started to try to roll and it just kind of went into a fast slide. And of course I was there. We have our risk play that we manage here and that we encourage. And they definitely discovered the difference between rolling down a more gentle hill versus the steeper hill. And again, that's physics. That's physics right there that they experienced very directly.
Yeah, it's that first tool you have, right? That first tool is your body.
Yeah.
And I particularly love to watch this when I see, infants and toddlers negotiating walking, right? Because they're doing all these micro experiments on, do I place my arm like this? Do I use my leg? I always find it interesting which children do that kind of shuffle where one leg is there for the engine, right?
Yeah.
And the other leg is kind of the brace. And so they sort of become like almost like a little propulsion system. And not all children develop that. Like only a subset of them find that to be their desired mode. Others just get up and start walking someday.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just a fascinating way in which they first start to tease out how to interact with the natural world. What is predictable? What is replicable? Right.
The variations in their physics experiments with gravity, essentially.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And they're using their primary tool as that predictable, like that's the baseline, right? Which I think is just a great way to exemplify what I think we all get excited about when it comes to this work. And it's something that you said, Sarah, that is both a real big challenge, I think, when talking about this, but also the blessing of it is that everything is so interrelated, everything is so interconnected that you can't really have, let's say, an arts activity without having a STEM activity, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Because to your point you were making when you were exploring the medium, what we're talking about, viscosity and temperature and identification of different, like all these different aspects of STEM that they had to do in engaging with the content of the medium, right? And then in your example, when they were creating things for the purpose of moving through the air and testing their theories around, well, what types of products, what types of materials do I need to be light enough to float or to get lift or whatever. And that's both what I think is really, really fun and exciting around the early childhood space is that you don't have to say, okay, now we have entered into math time, right? Science time. It's this natural, authentic integration where everything is present. And so back to that mindset point you made, it's really about what you want to focus on. How do you center the child's curiosity in the moment and layer in all of these developmentally appropriate aspects?
It's exciting stuff.
Yes. And it's very cool.
I think about the fact that even if you go down with infants who are not necessarily particularly mobile and their scope for exploration from our viewpoint is much narrower. From their viewpoint, they're literally making sense of everything.
Right.
So even a new piece of food or a new texture to explore or a new color to see is a series of building data. It is an exploration into their world. And so I love going to the baby room and I love watching them just taking in everything.
And it's interesting because it's like, I'm going to relate this to a teachery thing for a second. One of the assessments that we use at Pre-University is a gold assessment. So we take anecdotal notes, then kind of plug it in to see what kind of criteria this note meets. And it's been interesting to like kind of shift down because there's some things like learning to write, writing the name. Obviously that's going to look very different for like a pre-K than it would be for a 3-year-old, 2-year-old, or 1-year-old. Obviously there's some things that aren't going to be developmentally appropriate. A 6-month-old is not going to try and write their name, but it's just interesting to kind of see how our mind shift has to shift and understanding, like say, if we're looking for early literacy development or understanding our world. We were, again, going back to that alive, not alive, you have to kind of shift how you're thinking about it in order to find what you're looking for.
Right.
Because it's not going to look the same for a...
You have to suspend expectation.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, you have to sort of elevate what you think about so your point about what is writing a name represent? It's a symbol, right? It's a mark that you make on the world and who you are, your intentions. And so in a somewhat poetic way, right, like any mark acts as an initial way to explore writing, right? And so giving a child something and then, which I know is sort of, depending on how you were raised, might provoke anxiety in you. giving your child a marker and then not being worried about whether they mark the floor, the wall, the television, like a thing, right? That in some ways is that preliminary foundational space to say, I'm going to imprint something into the world and it will have permanence, right? And that object permanence is such a big thing that they toy with in those early stages. And so how that becomes one of the fundamental underpinnings that eventually turns into name, into art, into STEM, into anything, any creation, right? It really reframes. And I don't mean to say this in a way to, like if I was talking to my wife, she'd probably get really anxious because she's one of those concrete sequential people that when you sort of talk about the impact and the power and the million synapses a second conversation, she's like,
Too much.
Every second impression. But in truth, there's so much flexibility and while they are paying attention and they're constantly absorbing, there's so much grace in it too, right? So, but it's just about being that consistent person that is welcoming it, right? To the point you made so many beautiful times throughout this conversation. And so how do we do that in such a way that we, whether we're parents or educators, remind ourselves that is really the most important thing, right? That it's not, we don't want perfect to be the enemy of good, right? And so we want everyone to be able to center this philosophy so that our children get the benefit of just being that authentic, creative little STEM geniuses that they are without our tamping.
Because there are so many opportunities at this age for children to have catalyzing experiences, to have exposures to things, to joy in things that if allowed to grow, they continue throughout their lives, taking it into STEM, taking it into the arts. And I feel like in the world that we're presented with these days, it can be very easy to find yourself in a position where shutting that down is just too easy. It's just too easy if you're not thoughtful about it.
And technology can be, we can have a whole podcast on not the danger, but
what is
the intentionality of technology.
Well, it's interesting because I'm thinking about like the shutting down aspect. One thing that people can be very particular about is bugs. I personally love bugs, I am happy to sit there with a child and have them look at the bug, explore, talk about all the different, how many legs does it have? What does it do?
So if it's bees, I'm gonna let you take the lead.
Yeah, I'll be a little Miss Snow White with the bees, and I've done that before where I've literally gotten a flower and I'm like, oh look, see, it goes to the flower. You're not a flower. Just as long as you're chill, they'll snip you and move along. But like that's something that again can be huge for a child that can set them up for life. If the adults in their life act with disgust or revulsion or fear over bugs, then they may not develop an interest in exploring that aspect of the world where there are some kids that they may discover it and that might open up a whole field for them down the line where they might become an entomologist. I mean, not every child who puts a little cricket in their hand is going to become an entomologist, but it opens up different.
But you close the door if you don't give them the chance, right? Like that's the point.
Yeah.
It's so funny because this has sort of happened in my own life where my wife is very scared of insects. I've never been scared of insects. Even bees, even though I'm allergic, I have anti-venom. And the bee, to your point, I've learned the bee will come, they'll be like, oh, you're not a flower, they'll leave. But my son now holds both truths in him. And so he'll go, oh, insects. So he'll get the activation, right, that he's learned, to your point, but then also have sort of this curiosity and calmness that lets him go I don't want it to touch me. He's been pretty adamant, he doesn't want it to touch me. But he wants to watch it and get close to it. So it's
to put it in a cup and watch it.
Investigate from a safe distance.
And he might become, to your point, a scientist who just puts them in little containers and does his little studies.
We have a couple of quick questions.
Yes.
There's a really fast one from Wayne about how many students are in the younger toddler class and then in the older toddler class, and what we consider to be ideal for class size.
In terms of ratios?
In terms of ratios.
The way we have it set up right now, PKFRSA, is I feel like it's rather unique. We have what we call pods. So I'm the teacher over the toddler pod, and what that looks like is there's 2 classrooms. At this moment, we have an older toddler room and a younger toddler room. And in each toddler room, we have an associate teacher, an assistant teacher, and then there's an aide that floats between the 2 rooms. So essentially, we have 3 adults in the room at all times with 12 students. So that breaks down to a ratio of
24.
exactly.
And that is pretty common in the infant space to have a 1-to-4 ratio. You can see some programs go up to 1 to 6 as they go to toddler. But I agree. I think that what we do is really lovely because you want smaller ratios as possible. It is better for children to have more of that attention from the caregiver, especially at a very young age. You know, you didn't mention this, but I know that it's a big commitment point for you, is that continuity of care, right? You're developing that really precious relationship between their caregivers. And so 3 people, if I'm a child and I've become accustomed to you, you become a safe, trusted adult to me, it creates a greater chance of my continuity of care, because if you have to be human and
Get
it, yeah, or what have you, I still have 2 other adults, right? Or at least 1 other adult that I have a trusted relationship with, right? So, you know, all this work is, as we all know, I'm sure, is founded on that underpinning, the children's safety, neurological safety, and how it's interesting because science does such a great job as they explore it to create their own senses of predictable safety, right? Like these experiments help them determine what is predictable, what can I replicate, and in this exact thing, how they call to us is an experiment too, right? Sarah, like when I cry, do you come?
Yeah.
Right? When
I was gonna
call,
say,
do you come?
it just existing in the classroom is a study and
Yes.
is studying human beings. Like,
Yes.
is this adult gonna come to me when I cry?
That's right. That's
And
right.
if which adult responds to me more, which do I feel more comfortable with? That in and of itself is its own little social science experiment.
Absolutely.
And
Think
what
about,
yeah,
sorry, I think about babies dropping their spoon.
Yes.
And it's gravity and it's sound and it's adult reaction.
Yeah, like,
and
what are we gonna do here? Yeah.
and how we unintentionally, because we're trying to do this thing of, well, it's time to eat. And we put these constraints of time around that. And so they drop the spoon and all of a sudden it's like, well, you're playing now, right? And so how can we get back to that mindset thing? And we don't have enough time to talk about it today, but another day, I would love to sort of touch on, because it's my personal jam, on how this neurological approach really builds the brain. And it's the foundation of how we think and behave. And you see it in adults all the time. We get the good fortune of sort of seeing that groundwork that then you look at an adult and you go, oh, I see.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's true in all the fields we talk about, in STEM education and people's either perceived, because it is sometimes imprinted upon us that we're told, oh, I'm not good at math, or I'm not good at science, right? That perception is placed on us, or we never were really allowed to flourish in that space.
And it's interesting you mentioned the I'm not good at math, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that. I know for me, like middle school, high school is when I started to struggle with math. But when I started teaching, like I've taught mostly like pre-kindergarten, but I taught 2nd grade for a few years and I taught 1st grade for a year. And one of the things I always made sure when I was teaching math, I didn't want to imprint that idea that, oh, math is hard, or I don't like math. So I always made sure that I was like, okay, we're excited about it. Because again, your biases imprint on them. And again, that also applies even to the early years. Going back to the bug thing, like if you see a bug and you freak out, then they learn.
Oh, well, that's a reason to freak out.
Yeah.
So David had a really interesting question. I'm going to ask him if he'd be willing to unmute, because I would like for him to ask it in his own words.
I would love that. David, join us.
Sure. So a while back, I teach aviation or taught aviation in high school. I also taught physics and chemistry. So most of what I do is geared and has been geared to high school students, junior high students. We did have a class in 7th and 8th grade aviation. We also went into the 4th grade and 5th grade to introduce those students to 3 weeks of aviation, kind of experimentally. And what we found is at that age, they could absorb a lot. I mean, I was really surprised at the questions, the level, their interest seemed to be so much higher than we thought the fourth and fifth graders would be. And we did that to introduce them to careers in aviation. So my question was, is there a specific way or means that your teachers introduce careers to the pre-K students and even younger? Do you have professionals come in? I have grandchildren. We talked about that earlier, and there are a lot of books out there that we read about careers, firemen, policemen. There's even a couple of great aviation pop-up books that introduce them to a pilot as a career. But is there something specific that you guys at Pre-K for SA or any early childhood development educational curriculum finds works best for students at that age?
Well, it's going to echo a lot of what we've already talked about in the sense that most appropriate early childhood curriculum really centers around this idea of trying to replicate what is natural, right? Like not trying to, disaggregate a concept and put it in isolation. And so, to your point, all these careers are part of everyday life. All these careers are part of the community that people are in. And part of what our job is to do is to help ground children in understanding the world that they're in. Mm-hmm. And so there isn't, I wouldn't so say like, well, it's now career day, right? That doesn't really come up. And we do have a partnership with like Edgewood ISD where we run Gardendale, and that goes all the way to second grade. And in that space, there might be opportunities where some of the older children will have, opportunities to sort of engage, not specifically to talk about careers, but just sort of talk about community members and people that are sort of part of our everyday life, right? And there are tons of books and literature and, community-focused units that all circle around. These are the people that are in our lives, and these are the ways in which our world works, and who are the people that are contributing to that world working that way.
I was gonna say, in our classroom, one of the things that we've done, of course, as you're saying, it's not necessarily appropriate in terms of like introducing careers to a 2-year-old in a way that they can, you can introduce careers, but they don't really have a concept for like what a career is.
Right.
But in our room, we have our picture book of our families.
Right.
But we've also included members of our community within the school, including like our custodian who comes by to help us with cash. So we kind of frame it in terms of like helpers. So we have our helpers who bring us our lunch. We have our helpers who are like our head of school is one of our helpers that we feature in there, so that they kind of have an introduction to who these people are in our community in a way that they can connect to, but at least not in the top
not in that sense. And to Leslie's point, because so much of early childhood is social, it's that interaction between the adults and the children and the children and the children. That as children come into the space, and we have a lot, almost every single space, not a lot, all of our spaces have spaces for children to share their families. Mm-hmm. All these families have careers. All these families have jobs, and children naturally engage in the conversation and talk about, my dad does this, my mom does this, my uncle does this, so it's more back to the points that were being made of us centering the curiosity and the natural trajectory of that curiosity, and not hindering if that includes a deep dive into aeronautics or a deep dive into,
And I think it comes down to, like, from a practical standpoint, because so much of what we're looking at the age ranges we're talking about at Pre-K for SA, right? So our infant all the way up through 4 or 5-year-olds getting ready to go to kindergarten,
right,
is focused on helping them understand the concept of what is a career. Right. Because you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they say, I want to be a daddy. Right. Or a cat.
Right.
Or an astronaut.
Right.
And so sort of building from the touch points that they had, you talked about your families being in that book of careers, is inviting those people in so that children we know that if things are going to have an impact on children, they have to have a connection to it. So my parent or my friend's parent or my classmate's parent, that's a connection that they can build on. If it's a special interest, then our teachers are all very trained and experientially background with the capacity to go, okay, I have a child who's interested in astronauts, or I have a child who's interested in train engineers, or a child who is interested in architects, and to bring in curated resources for that child to tap into that child's interest. I'm reminded of my very first class when we first started the program. I had a little boy in the class who adored drawing block buildings. He would spend 5 minutes building and then 30 minutes drawing what he had built. And I went, Frankie's gonna be an architect. And so I pulled in our great architecture from around the world and blueprints for him to work with and books. I think about 85 Architect, and we read that. He loved that book. And so just making sure to tailor what you're bringing into the classroom to the needs and interests of the children that are in your classroom.
Yeah, and you got to remember that, to Sarah's point, it's you're slowly building this little psychological foundation, right? And if you start with, to the beautiful point Sarah made, with the interest point that they already have, it's much easier to build on that, so that later on, to your point, they will have something to grab onto and something to say, oh, I have a framework to understand this career. Because right now, take my son who's just under 3, he might look at a construction vehicle and be like, oh, so cool, right? It's got this cool bucket, it moves dirt around, it's big, it's noisy, it's fun. That doesn't necessarily, not that it would bother me at all, mean that he's going to be, on a drill rig or on a concrete boom pump, which is really, it's got this concrete boom pump song that we love right now. But because it's not about the person, right? It's not yet about the person who manages or runs that job. It's about the machine.
Yeah.
And so what you want to do, to Sarah's beautiful point, is like start to introduce to him all the little components. We have neighbor who's getting a house built. And so I take him over there and we talk to the people and we see if they'll be kind enough to let him sit in the seat and all that stuff. To the point, like you're trying to foster the curiosity in a way that feels really natural.
And we have definitely, because we do not teach and work and live in isolation, we have folks who come by and do things. So across the road, they're building something at one center, or the firefighters came and they had to work on moving some obstructions.
Right.
And one of the wonderful things about, I want to say all communities, but for San Antonio, is just how open folks are to taking time for our littles to ask their questions and to show what they do when the opportunity presents itself in a natural fashion.
I was gonna say, we have our police officers that are around the building and they walk around, and I know the kiddos in my room, they will go up to the windows and they're like, oh, hi. And a lot of times the officer will stop and talk to them, or they'll wave to them. So it's like they're interacting naturally with a police officer in their environment, and that's one of the imprints for.
And it made me think about, we also have opportunities for people to read.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those instances, naturally, what they do will come up, children will have questions, but it's less curated than it does become, just to go back to your question. As you see older grades, I've worked in traditional K-12 education, you see it more curated as they get older, because it is more appropriate that people start to ground it in a career choice, right? They start to understand it from the concept of, I get to do this fun thing. So right now my son's thinking like, I want to drive this truck, that looks really cool. But he's not thinking about it as a career choice. Well, as he gets older, he might think, I want to dress up as that. I want to cosplay as that. I want to pretend to be that, right? And start to understand the mannerisms or the identity of that. And then eventually you'll get to the place where they start to ground it into their concept of what it means to be an adult in this life, right? And that is the right space, I think, to start to have people come in and answer those questions. So you can see that. I've seen that successfully done as early as kindergarten.
I don't know, did that answer your question, David?
It did. If I can share a little story, early on in fourth grade, we brought in for the aviation program, we brought in our flight instructor, and immediately the children were asking, and he came in his uniform, were asking, what are the bars on his shoulder? We explained without using the term epaulets, which describes what a pilot with more experience gets. We explained that that was a symbol of their training and their education. It was a week later, we brought in a captain, a jet blue captain for the airlines, and of course he had more bars. They immediately recognized that. A fourth grader, and it again, coming from high school, it totally surprised me. That was the first thing they noticed when the captain walked in. He has more stripes. And so, the the younger we teach kids, the more they can absorb. They are sponges. The
Yeah.
earlier you get, and I noticed that in my own grandchildren, of course, as well. They're sponges at an early age for science and technology and anything you can teach them.
We completely agree. They're absolutely curious. And I think the spirit of what we all would stand behind is, yeah, provide as many opportunities, provide as many
Provide
opportunities,
the vocabulary. 'cause
provide
they
the
will pick it
vocabulary,
up.
100%. You'll never know what seed will germinate, but plant them all.
It's too quiet, but I wanted to say I enjoyed it because I don't really hear the very, very young side of educational learning. And I spent most of my career in high school learning. So it's very interesting to me. I look forward to participating and hearing more from you guys. Thank you, though, very much for today.
We appreciate you so much for being here. And I think the more that educators on both sides of the conversation can come together, I think it bridges our ability to be able to support both ends of the spectrum, right? Because I think there are things that are happening in our community, in our culture. Technology, as we all know, is advancing at such a rapid rate that we need to start thinking innovatively around, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, another day around just technology in general with regards to STEM. But I think that there are lots of people who are sitting in this space of saying, well, when is it appropriate to introduce technology, or when is it appropriate, to your point, your lovely question around, to start to have deep conversations around careers? Because speaking to the young people in my life who are like, right, that teenager space where if they want to be really competitive, right? I was talking to a good friend of my wife's who wants their daughter to go into veterinary medicine, right? And my wife's advice to them was, you need to, in high school, in like 9th grade, start doing residencies. And I just think about it, like how competitive that must be, that almost middle school, you're going and starting your career trajectory. And so I think the more we can talk, the more on all sides of the education conversation, all families, everyone interested in this, can come together and have this conversation. It's only going to benefit children and families.
Well, on that note, I was thinking about, John, you talking to my granddaughters, because the reason is that I've got two granddaughters, these particular two. We have three granddaughters, but talking about the two that are going to be seniors in college next year, neither one of whom has a clue about what they want to do. So if you can get them to focus on that question, that kudos to you. But
Well, I think the heart of it, right? You probably agree, because you're such a thoughtful human as well. Is about sitting down with them and having a conversation, just like you would any child, and figuring out what their why is, what drives them, what excites them.
I was gonna say, I think for some people, they have to experience the world to be able to figure out where that direction is gonna go. There are fortunate ones that figure it out early.
Oh yeah.
I was in 8th
Some of us
grade.
take longer.
Yeah, I was in 8th grade and I was like, I want to be a kindergarten teacher. So, obviously, when I was in 8th grade, kindergarten probably looks more like what we do in pre-K.
That's right. That's right.
But not everyone really has that solidified
Yeah.
that clarity early on, and sometimes people just kind of have to experience life to figure out where they want to go.
Sometimes you have to be a scientist.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let me end on this point. Besides, thank you all very, very much. Great program, great conversation. A personal story about early childhood education. I taught in Head Start for one summer in Edgewood School District. I've always had a personal interest in helping underserved kids. I'm not saying I'm right about this, but it's just a perspective that I gained from that, and that I've always thought about every day in what we do. And that is that I think those kids are back then anyhow, who lived in shacks with dirt floors and no running water. They had a lot of challenges in their lives, but I felt that their greatest challenge was the lack of expectations of them, and they had no role model. They unfortunately lived up to those expectations more often than not. And sometimes on another show, perhaps y'all could address that as the experts about how, whether you see that, how you deal with that, because I think the rest are details. They're important details. The greatest challenge, I think, is to introduce these kids to opportunities or help them realize that those are opportunities they could have.
Yeah, well, that just kind of reminded me, like I heard once, and I believe this too, that like every child should have someone as their champion.
Yes.
And a lot of times it will fall to us as educators to have to, I say to have to, it's
a responsibility and an honor.
Exactly. We need to be there for our kids. We need to be their champion. We need to be there for them to let them know that there's a possibility for more for them.
That's right.
To let them know that we believe in them.
That's right.
Because again, not everyone has that. Going back to what he was saying, not everyone has that.
Agreed.
And we have that responsibility.
It's a perfect endpoint, I think, for this session, because we started with this conversation around mindset, right?
Yes.
And I think we're ending with the same notion. We have a responsibility, and it's an honor to get to support the creation of a positive mindset. And that means as much for educators, as much for families, as much as our colleagues, so that we can do the best that we can to show up for our children. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us on our talks. Please join us every third Thursday of the month to be a part of the conversation as we explore all these different topics and more related to STEM in early childhood. Thank you again, Leslie, so much. Thank you, Sarah.
And don't be afraid to drop a comment in the chat, either here in our virtual session, or if you're watching this after the fact, in the comments below, if you have other topics you'd like for us to discuss.
We'd love it.